So as you can see on this map, which is River Point, starting on the south side of the map, you end up on quite an elevated hill with bushes, trees, a few rocks and varying terrain, which leads downwards into the valley towards the town, which is generally where you'll find most of the MBTs heading. On the left is generally a good place for TDs and light tanks, and on the right flank you will generally also find MBTs go that way, which is a very narrow passageway. So heading over to the left from the south location, there is a bridge. There is also an alternate route down on the left which brings you up behind the big rock you see on the left here. Where I'm heading to now is the default location that I use for tank destroyers. And you can also take AFVs up here for good spotting potential. Reason being, if you notice the rock there and the lots of foliage around here, there's a good amount of cover, camo. You've got good vision down this entire left flank here. Although I say entire, the varying terrain approaching from the north there is fairly favourable to the people from the north. And there are a lot of dips, nooks and crannies to hide yourself behind to avoid being shot from this particular location. Also you could move forward from here as demonstrated towards the rock, which allows you to see towards the town, where if people are coming through the outside and even certain parts within the city, you'll be able to see them and hopefully get some decent shots on them from that particular location. On the opposing side of the map to the north, you can see that you're starting in another elevated area with quite a decent amount of foliage, bridge to the right leading to the same flank that I just showed you, and then there is a pathway or two towards the main city area. There are also some fields, some small buildings, a few little pitfalls with bodies of water in, and this bit here will take you to the outskirts of the town and towards a central area within the right hand flank from the north that will allow you access up rather than going straight down the flank face first. However, you are exposed to anyone that has good spotting range from the south side that might be on one of the elevated ridges. From the opposing side, the north, you can see here that my friend helping me with this is approaching from the middle section of this flank via the river. You can head up here, and he's also using the mass amounts of foliage here for cover for himself. Obviously I've told him where I am so we can test out the spotting mechanic. He's behind this bush and fires a shot in this direction, to which gets him spotted, but he still can't see me. This also demonstrates how spotting will work, and then he can see me once I take a shot and I'm out in the open. Now you'll also notice on the left there's an elevated piece of land with the rocks and trees on that you cannot go up. That is out of bounds for this particular map. So another location that's actually useful on this flank is slightly to the right of here, across this pathway, and the elevated lump of land here, which provides a little bit of rock for cover and some foliage, but is otherwise fairly exposed from the invading force of the north if they approach on this flank. Bear in mind that they still have cover with the varying types and size of terrain, but this will give you alternate shots from the location on the left. You can also slightly see better here from the force if they come from the centre of the map in or around the town area. As you can see there, Xander's popped up behind that ridge, and I have no shots due to it being the shape that it is and fairly elevated. Now let's take a closer look at these ridges that I've been on about on this particular flank. As you can see, if you follow the road here, the terrain on the left is rather elevated and sloped, which will provide amazing cover. You've got the bit on the right here which will protect you from shots of the centre of the map. If we swing around here, you can see the various pathways, and again on the far edge towards the boundaries of the map, another raised area here with a few trees that provide absolutely no cover or foliage, camo value. You can see from here that it's elevated, and there are various other pathways with varying levels of terrain around this area. You do not want to be sitting on the top of one of those platforms, as you will be easily seen and shot by multiple targets. So here we're going to demonstrate this little V block in the land here that can be used as sort of a tunnel, and see how far down you can actually track an opponent for before they're not spotted. As you can see, Xander's running away quite fast, and he's quite far down the map if you check the mini-map, and I can still see him. I mean, I haven't got an actual shot on him, but still spotting him that far out, which proves how deadly this flank can actually be, with the amount of visual spotting range you can have if you sit in the right place within the terrain. And that is one thing you really need to bear in mind. Just because you can't see an enemy doesn't mean that they're not waiting in a place like this ready to spot you, just like this. I spotted him way before he spotted me, and I would have had a few shots, and so would my teammates. So that just goes to show that you should really pay attention to these little nooks and crannies on this particular flank and plan accordingly to ensure that you can't be seen or shot at, but you'll be able to see approaching threats with plenty of time to react to whatever happens. Now let's take a closer look at the central part of the map, which consists of a circular town or city, whichever you prefer to call it. Now upon approach from this area, you got to cross the river. There are some elevated land parts with some small vehicles, buildings, rocks, but nothing substantial for cover. As you can see, this land here is elevated up towards the road on either side. So once you're up onto the road, either side slants downwards and will provide you cover from the opposing flank, as it were. If you drive around the south side of the city, it's very open, there's not a lot of cover, and anything from the south, if you're an enemy, will be able to shoot at you. Now on this side, from the south, which is the right side, there are some rocks there which can be used for cover against that particular flank and along the road. It is fairly reasonable to fight around this area if both flanks are pushing on this particular side, but otherwise, if you're not in an MBT or something that can hold its own, it's probably best to avoid this area until the later stages of the game where there's not many enemies remaining. Now we were testing this particular part here, where we can see how the terrain is working, and if you have shots on each other. The shots here are pretty slim. I've got a shot on Xander, he's probably got a few on me even behind this rock, but as you can see back towards that bridge on the south side, the terrain is fairly favourable to the person that is in that particular section. This particular section on the south is fairly advantageous. As you can see, I was on about it being exposed on the south side of the city. Xander would have shots on me using this ridge, especially in vehicles with good gun depression such as the ERC-90. He's got shots on me all the way down there, but he's using a ridge so he could just roll backwards and nobody would have a shot. That is something you need to be very aware of if you're fighting from anywhere that isn't this section and you come around that side of the city. If there's people waiting for you, you're going to be at a total disadvantage. Now let's take a closer look actually inside the city. If you approach from this area, there are ridges all the way up in various locations that you can use to access the city, which does not include using the main roads. There are plenty of buildings, nooks, crannies, alleyways, and the buildings in the actual centre seem to have pillars that you can shoot through, which can be used as cover. Can be a problem if you forget they're there. Some of the smaller vehicles or accurate cannons will be able to get through there with ease. As you can see, there's also vehicles which are destroyable and other objects within the central part of the plaza here. The spotting works quite well through the pillars, as you can see here. Looking across the central part from my perspective, and also Xander's looking through. There's a wrecked plane there that fell down at the beginning of the round. As you can see, there's also destroyable things in the middle which can block shots, but generally the shells will go straight through. So if you take your time and are careful, this is a fairly good place to fight, mainly for MBTs because they have the armor to do so. But if you do get vehicles like the wheeled tank destroyers, light tanks coming up behind you or beside you, it can be a problem if you don't notice. If you're sitting in the middle of the plaza or in a more open section of the city, then people will utilise these pillars that are demonstrated here. Some of the other broken and burnt vehicles in the centre are also able to shoot through some of the gaps. So just be aware if you are fighting there to try and have map awareness and keep your sides and rear covered rather than exposed where it's possible to do so. Now if we come out of the north side of the city, as you can see there's plenty more buildings. Generally the city consists of two rings. It's got an outer layer and inner layer which you can fight between the outskirts and the inner side of the city, and then you've got the central part which again consists of more buildings. So there's essentially three sections of the central part. As you can see to the north of it here, there's open land, as we mentioned earlier, buildings, a few little farms and water areas, but aside from that it is fairly open. There are a few little ups and downs and variation in terrain, but nothing major that's going to offer massive amounts of cover unless you head right up to the north starting point of the spawn point there. As you can see, most of this is just in fact open land. There's a few camo areas for shrubbery and bushes, but nothing major that's going to make you want to use this open area as a fighting ground. That will generally just end up with people getting killed. Now if we approach the right hand side of the flank looking from the south, you'll see that what I was on about earlier, that this is pretty much just a long straight for tanks to battle it out. There isn't a lot of cover. There's this rock here, there's a few other things either side that you can try and take cover behind. Also on the right, closer to the central bridge section, there is some sloped terrain that you can roll back and forth between if you've got a decent gun elevation and reasonable frontal armour. But aside from that, it's essentially just a tin can shooting alley where tanks will just either shoot each other and bounce off or destroy each other, and then the losing flank will just get rolled while the enemy advance towards them. If it happens that the enemy has a lot of MBTs and they will just rock down here with lots of frontal armour and you have low penetration guns, the chances are you're not going to be able to do much to stop them from making that advance. As you can see here, there's a slightly elevated area, there's a big rock there, but I've got a clear shot on Xander from here. He's probably got one on me just as well. So there's really not a lot to be said for this area, apart from it is essentially just a shooting gallery that you should probably avoid unless you have that mass amount of armour to use. Moving further forward, as you can see, there's a couple of pillars from the overhead bridge there. Again, nothing major that's going to offer any sort of solid cover from various angles. You'll be able to get right behind it and not be shot direct from a frontal location. But anybody on the opposing side of those pillars that has an angle that isn't sitting flush the same as you are, then they're essentially just going to shoot you in the back or the side or whatever it is you end up revealing. So if we approach the same location from the north side of the map, you've got a few pillars here on the overhead bridge, but as that's on the corner, it's unlikely you'll be doing much fighting in that particular location. Driving down the road here, as you can see, it's fairly open ground as you approach that central bridge with the pillars. There's a rock here on the left, not particularly large, and then it slopes down after the wreckage bridge here towards the water, which you could use, but again, it's just open ground. So personally, I try to avoid this particular location for fighting where I can. It doesn't really offer a lot of flexibility or fun in my opinion. It is just an alley waiting for people to die, and whoever has the superior firepower will generally win that particular area. Here, I haven't shown you yet, but it's basically just a wreckage on the south side by that bridge. not a lot to say about it really. It can offer a bit of cover if you're in dire need of running away and need somewhere to hide for a short second or two to break sight, but other than that it's not particularly noteworthy. Back up to the ridge here on the south side, I do believe this is the favourable side generally speaking, or at least for a defensive position. It's much more elevated, you've got a lot more cover and varying terrain that you can use, although I do still feel that the 1-2 line area of this map is probably favourable to the north side team due to the variable terrain that they can use on approach to the south. You do have that sniping spot that I mentioned at the beginning of this map tutorial, but that's not a saving grace, because if they figure out you're there and they just open fire, the chances are you haven't got a lot of places to run or hide, whereas they have the mass amounts of variable terrain that they can use in their favour. So all in all, I think that's about covered most of the sections of this map. As you can see, Xana's driving around here and I've got plenty of shots from up here. Even with these rocks I can use for cover if I need to, and you can just sort of rock in and out where you need to. You've also got our big church-like building there. Well, I hope that this has been useful to at least some of you to learn this map a little bit better and the various locations and what they contain. As I said, there's not really much to be said for the right side of the map looking from the south side. I much prefer to fight on the left or in the centre of this map, as I do find the other side, which is the alley, just to be fairly bland and boring, and it just ends up with one side dying or not and nobody advancing. So feel free to leave me your comments and any information that you'd like to see added in future tutorials, and I will see you all next time. Thank you for watching.